Hi everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Brewed to Inspire, where we explore ideas, share valuable insights on teaching, discuss effective strategies, and navigate the ups and downs of teaching together, all while inspiring our students over a cup of coffee. I'm your host, Peyton Yun, and today's podcast will focus on uncovering why we study English language arts, envisioning the ideal classroom environment, and reflecting on what should happen in a language arts classroom. So teachers, grab a cup of coffee and let's brew into this topic. Got your coffee? Okay, bear with me here. So before we get into the discussion, we have to first explain what English language arts is. So any listeners that are not familiar with the subject can have a general sense of what it means. So English language arts, or ELA for short, is a core subject in both elementary and secondary classrooms, where students develop their skills and understanding in spoken, visual, and written language. Essentially, ELA teaches students how to communicate confidently and apply strategies to comprehend and respond to different types of texts in various situations. Now, according to the Alberta Program of Studies, there are 6 key areas of study, which are referred to as the 6 language arts. These are listening, speaking, reading, writing, viewing, and representing. So now that you have a better idea of what ELA is, let's address the main question. Why do we study it? Well, if we were to ask our students this question, half would say because it's mandatory. And the other half would say something like it helps us communicate better and enhances our reading skills. While both answers are true, because we can't deny that it's a mandatory subject, the answer to this question really depends on your personal beliefs and perspective. For example, some teachers might say that studying ELA helps us connect with the world through various forms of writing and language, while other teachers believe it builds our critical thinking skills, which prepares us for real-life experiences. But here's the thing. Both of these perspectives are valid, and honestly, they're probably the reason why they chose to teach ELA in the first place, because our motivations and beliefs about a subject often shape why we think it's important for our students to study it. But through this discussion and our analysis of the question, we've forgotten something important, something that inspired my very passion for this subject. And that is that with ELA, there's never just one right answer. It's not like math, where 2 + 2 will always equal 4. Instead, the answer is up for interpretation. Think of it this way. If 2 people read the same novel or poem, do you think they interpret the same way? No, of course not, because we each have our own experiences and perspectives that shape how we understand and connect to the text. For example, you could relate your personal experience with the novel, which would make you read it differently than someone who hasn't had your experience, while other students could have found meaning in a small detail that you may have missed. And that's the beautiful thing about language arts. This subject isn't just about reading and writing, but it's about inspiring our students to express themselves and engage with others to expand their knowledge and gain a deep understanding of the world around them. So why study ELA? It's mandatory. Just kidding. So now that we've discussed the reasons for studying ELA, let's explore what this looks like in the classroom. Do you ever notice how no 2 classrooms ever look the same? I know I have, and there were definitely some classroom environments that I liked better than others. So why is that? Is it the decor, the teaching strategies, or the classroom dynamics? Well, yeah, it's all of it. You see, every teacher has their own unique teaching style and methods, and the choices the teacher makes shapes the classroom environment and ultimately makes or breaks their student engagement. Think of it this way. You can have a teacher that implements active learning practices, such as having students work collaboratively to discuss a text or a topic in the classroom. Or you can have a more traditional teacher that gets students to write notes while listening to their lecture. Both of these classrooms are set up differently, as one encourages discussion and collaboration, while the other reinforces what has been taught through note-taking and recall. But how do these methods affect our students, and how differently do they act in these 2 classrooms? Well, let me ask you this. Have you ever been in one of those classes where the teacher's lecture feels like a never-ending monologue? Where you're sitting there writing notes and staring at the clock, watching it tick so slowly, and are trying so hard not to fall asleep? I have, and I'm guessing you have too. How effective do you think this was for you? Did you learn or retain anything? Probably not, because you weren't engaged with the topic. And honestly, it's not your fault. And as teachers, we have to remember that it's not our students' fault either, because we've been there and we understand that it's hard to retain information when we're disengaged or distracted. The truth is that teaching methods really do matter, and that when teachers are in a passive learning environment, like a classroom that limits students' creativity by making them take notes to a monotone lecture, it's easy for the students to disengage and have their mind wander. Now, I'm not saying that note-taking is inefficient. In fact, it's a great study tool and helps our students refer back to important information throughout the course. But note-taking alone isn't going to engage our students with the material. And that's why a teacher who encourages active learning in the classroom is going to have a better response and higher engagement than one who solely emphasizes on note-taking. This is why the ideal English language arts classroom should be a place where teachers implement strategies and provide students with opportunities that encourage their creativity and critical thinking, so that they can dive deeper into the content and actively engage with their learning. So what can teachers do to make this happen? Well, first, let's reflect on our teaching experience, or even your experience as a student. But for this to work, you have to be honest. Have there been times when you as a teacher unintentionally limited your students' creativity or ability to participate? Or maybe as a student, you felt that your opinion didn't matter and that stopped you from contributing. If you're unsure, let me give you another way to look at it. You as a teacher are teaching your favorite novel, and you have all these notes on a particular scene and its significance. You ask your students, what's the significance of this part of the novel? And you're waiting for your students to give you the answer you're looking for. Sure, students raise their hand and give you their interpretation, but it's not what you're hoping to hear. So you say, okay, and continue to the next student, to which they do the same thing, but get a little closer to what you're looking for. So you shrug and say, we're almost there. And this continues until a student says the answer you have in mind. Sound familiar? What do you think the teacher is doing wrong in this scenario? Or do you think the teacher is doing everything right? Well, the teacher is providing an opportunity for their students to voice their thoughts, which is important. But let me ask you something. Are the students being heard? Not really. Because in this instance, the teacher is so focused on hearing the answer they are looking for, the answer that aligns with their own interpretation of the novel, that they are overlooking the other students' perspectives and ideas, which limits their creativity and causes students to feel like their opinions or ideas don't matter because they're not being acknowledged. This is where we as teachers need to be careful, as it's easy for our love of literature to take over, which is why we have to remember that there isn't just one answer, and that everyone has different interpretations, and it's those diverse perspectives that add to our discussion and encourage our students to think critically. Because as teachers, we're brewed to inspire our students, not to restrict their interpretations. Now, I'm going to tell you a story from Dr. Sarah Goldsby-Smith's teaching experience that happens on page 315 to 316 in her article titled, From the Boundaries, Rhetoric Knowledge in Secondary English Classrooms. So in this article, Goldsby-Smith asked her students if Alice Munro's novel, Free Radicals, is crime fiction. While waiting for her students to answer, she noticed that they were trying to give the answer they thought she was looking for. But Goldsby-Smith didn't want this, so instead of trying to guide the conversation differently, she confessed to her students that she didn't know the answer and wanted to hear their perspectives. And it wasn't until that moment that they truly started engaging with the material. So much so that they began to ask their own questions and critically examine the text to develop their own insights, which helped the students learn from each other and even added to the teacher's own learning. Goldsby-Smith teaches us through this experience that it's okay for teachers to be, as she states, not the leader, but a participant, as this allows students to take control of the discussion and explore the content through their own lenses, which is exactly what we should see in a language arts classroom. Because students need an environment where they feel heard and are given the opportunity to engage in guided discussions and student-led conversations. Because without this balance, we're limiting their opportunity to learn from each other, which ultimately restricts their lifelong learning. But how can we take this further to ensure that our students aren't just participating in the classroom, but are truly engaged in the material and stay engaged? Well, that comes down to the kind of opportunities we create for our students. One way we can support our students' engagement is through multimodal learning, as this approach offers our students a choice in how they engage with the content. Now, multimodal learning is all about using different approaches in the classroom, including visual, auditory, reading, writing, and kinesthetic methods. And these methods not only accommodate different learning styles, but they offer differentiation in the classroom. When a teacher incorporates multimodality in their classroom, it gives students a choice in how they wish to engage with their learning, which usually relates to the type of assignment the student wants to do, let's face it. But that's okay, because when a student chooses an assignment that aligns with their strengths and interests, they usually engage more in their learning than they would if they were forced to complete an assignment that they hate. Think about it. When you were a student, if you had the choice, would you choose to write an essay when you've already written several? Or would you make a presentation? I'm guessing a presentation. And 80% of our students would agree with me, especially if they enjoy making PowerPoints or have a passion for drama. But seriously, it's that easy. When teachers implement multimodal learning, they give students choices of expressing their ideas and critical thinking through various forms such as visual presentation, an auditory podcast, or even a hands-on project. In an ELA classroom, we should provide opportunities for our students to express themselves and demonstrate their understanding in meaningful ways. And by offering choices, we deepen their engagement, foster their creativity, and enhance their learning experience far beyond essays or note-taking. And if you're still not convinced, multimodality also makes it easier to incorporate the 6 language arts. Just saying. But as teachers, we're Brewed to inspire, which is why I can't let you go without introducing you to one final strategy: restoring. What is restoring, you ask? Well, in this article, Restoring the Self, Bending Toward Textual Justice, Thomas and Sternilio demonstrate restoring on page 313 as a way to reshape narratives to represent a diversity of perspectives and experiences that are often missing or silenced. Which basically means that restoring is a way for students to rewrite existing stories in a way that encourages diverse perspectives and experiences that aren't typically represented in narrative, which allows students to make the text more relevant and personal. But what does this do for the students? Well, just like multimodality, restoring allows students to engage with the material by expanding their perspectives and relating the content to their interests. But instead of using different learning methods, restoring encourages students to bend the material to essentially create a new version of the story. Thomas and Sternilio demonstrate how teachers can implement restoring in the classroom by outlining 6 different methods of restoring on pages 318 to 321. But for the sake of this podcast, we're just going to focus on 3. So the first strategy is restoring perspectives, which teachers can use to encourage their students to retell events or stories from the point of view of a character whose experiences are often overlooked or rarely spoken of. Let's think about Hamlet for a second. What if we had our students tell the story from Ophelia's point of view? After all, she is overshadowed by the male characters. What would this do for our students? Would it change their perspective? Perhaps create empathy for her madness? The learning opportunities are endless, and this is the perfect method for getting students to write stories that are not typically told, to connect deeper with the text and expand their perspectives. Because as teachers who are brewed to inspire, we should be challenging our students to see beyond the text and rethink traditional narratives. The next strategy is restoring time and place. This strategy encourages students to retell stories using a different time frame or setting, which allows them to explore how time and place shape the narrative. For this strategy, teachers can have their students research a particular time period or location, and then retell the story to demonstrate how the narrative would change. Imagine your students exploring how dueling in Romeo and Juliet would change if it was set in a modern-day context. Or what would happen to Hamlet if it was based on the prehistoric era where theater didn't exist? Another way to approach this is by encouraging your students to bring in their cultural interpretations to explore how diverse cultural perspectives affect the narrative. Finally, the last strategy is called restoring across modes, and it's a form of transmedia storytelling as it encourages students to transform a story using multimodal learning. Yep, it's back. Now, I know what you're thinking. We already went over multimodal learning. Yes, we did. But this is even better. You see, restoring across modes encourages our students to transform a story using different modalities, which gets them to think critically about how stories change when they shift from one mode to another. So, ways you can implement this in the ELA classroom is by having students transform a story into a painting, a dance, or even a song, as it creates an entirely new type of narrative and enables students to observe how the meaning of the text or the medium shifts across different modalities. So why does this matter in the ELA classroom? Well, by encouraging our students to restory or choose a modality, they aren't just focusing on one interpretation or memorizing the plot. Instead, they're taking control of their learning, which helps them connect more with the material and encourages their creativity, which is what we should see in the ELA classroom. You see, when teachers give students opportunities to reshape texts and relate them in a way that's meaningful or relatable to them, they don't just engage more in the classroom, but they develop a stronger connection to the material, which builds their critical thinking skills and supports their lifelong learning. And isn't that what we thrive for in an ELA classroom? Well, that's it for today's episode. As always, thank you for listening, and I hope this episode encouraged you to reflect on your own teaching and brewed up some new strategies to explore in your classroom. I also hope that you grab a fresh cup of coffee, because I know I will. Until next time, I'm Peyton, and this has been Brewed to Inspire.